and back to Mark Twain, who I wrote my dissertation about, actually met him in Shakespeare, but basically he probably has my favorite quote of all time. And I've repeated it many times, but I think right now is important in this dialogue. He said that it's not what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And so being able to know that problems are the gifts that we grow from, and looking at them and thinking one of the biggest, I think, misunderstandings we have as human beings on this earth is thinking that we're not supposed to have problems.
Yeah.
If I could re-signify for my children that when you see a problem, look at it as a gift of something that is going to grow you, shape you, mature you for whatever that destination that you're after. I think if that one thing could be instilled into their mind alone, I think they'd be on the path to living an even more beautiful life. I'm getting better at realizing that I'm a human also, because chastising yourself every day for not being perfect is just not productive.
Right.
And I've done that for most of my life, and maybe it did accelerate some of my accolades on paper, but it sure didn't create a fulfilling, meaningful life. And at this point in my life, I'm more concerned with a full, meaningful life than I am with checking off a bunch of boxes on a resume, for the record. But he calls it emotional priming. And the same way that we exercise our physique, our muscles, our emotional health has that same level of fitness, for lack of a better word. So you start off and you do this breathing where you put your arms over your head, you breathe out through your nose. We have tons of science around what happens when you breathe through these patterns. Heart becomes coherent, brain becomes coherent. And when your brain and heart are coherent, you automatically make better decisions. It's just science, where science has now become the language of mysticism, which is a very beautiful thing that we can quantify it. So doing this breathing, then having a gratitude practice, where very simply, and I know some of this stuff sounds super corny, but it works.
This episode of the Bitcoin Economy is brought to you in part by Ledin.
Need cash but don't want to sell your Bitcoin? Ledin is the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans, issuing over 9 billion loans since 2018. And they were the first to offer proof of reserves.
With Ledin, you get custody loans, no credit checks, no monthly payments, and more. Visit ledn.io for more information. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Economy. I'm here with Ari Rastegar, the Oracle of Austin. And I was researching of what to discuss with you, and there was quite a bit we'll uncover, right? So we'll do health, wealth, and Bitcoin, I thought would be the three things to kind of uncover. And so your family first started off coming from Iran. You came here with, from what I had understood, not a lot, right? And you've now grown a very successful Oracle of Austin, real estate kind of throughout the world, and especially in the Sun Belt, we'll discuss as well. But first and foremost, welcome to the podcast.
I really appreciate you having me.
So coming in, you take away your Instagram, you take away all the accolades you've had, starting from zero. Who is Ari?
Well, Ari is a guy that desperately wanted to do something meaningful. And I didn't really know what that really is. And a lot of the path that we've had until now is also kind of unfolding into what that is. Real estate, is quite literally a foundational element, not to be, too cheeky, of the rest of the things that we are planning on investing in and doing. But I'm an attorney by trade. So looking at things, I look through them through a vantage point of compliance, through the vantage point of law. And as you said, my family coming from Iran at a very, very, difficult time, to say the least, it really showed me what it meant to have real liberties, have real freedom, have property rights. And my father's an attorney as well. He went to law school a little bit later in life. And so that's really the foundational piece of who I am as a person, is this understanding of like foundational liberties, of your own personal liberty as a human being, and then the liberties that we can give to people as well.
And I always ask, the first question is, you've gone on and earned, tremendous amounts of wealth, but what is money, when it comes down to it? What does money mean to you?
Money's a tool, money's a tool. And it's, money amplifies, whoever the person is that's holding it. You can look at a gun the same way. You can look at it as a tool for defense, as a tool for hunting, for feeding your family, or it can be used for nefarious activities. Money is really no different in that regard. I'm by no means a money worshiper, but certainly in a capitalist society, when you have investors that are firefighters, that are teachers, that are doctors, this is the tool that they use to fulfill their dreams and be able to take care of their families. And that part is extremely meaningful for me. So the more of this tool and this social utility that they have makes me working to do the work that I do at a grandiose level, to say the least.
And in terms of coming here, you were born here in the US, but being first generation, I'm second generation. So I heard tons of stories from my parents growing up. What was that like as a childhood coming, your father had immigrated over, your family did. What was that like growing up? How did that inspire kind of who you've become today?
I think it's a huge, huge piece. I mean, Iranian culture is arguably, depending on which historian you look at, the oldest culture in the world. And so having that depth, having the poetry, the food, the spices. I actually spoke Farsi before I spoke English, and I also speak Spanish fluently. I lived in Mexico for quite some time during my undergraduate. My children are half Hispanic, and learning from a culture that has that much depth, I think gives you a grounding piece. And so hearing those different sounds, being exposed to a global society allowed me to kind of dream with a little bit more dimensionality. I think. And if you look at, Sanskrit or you look at the English language, it's a shortened language at best, to meaning the expression that we have with a language that has this many limitations versus some of the more ancient languages that allows us to be able to express ourselves different. And, my dad always jokes that I think in Farsi, but speak in English.
Yeah, I always wondered that if people dream in certain languages and whatnot. It's interesting. I always give myself a pat on the back. When I was 25, I quit my job. I went and traveled the world. And, some of the most, important lessons I think I've learned were some of the hardest things at the time. Right. So I remember being in Vietnam and the train didn't come for like 6 hours. And it was very frustrating at the time, but I had the foresight to say, you know what, like these are the times that I will remember the most. Right. Was there any like struggles specific, I don't know if there was one or two specific ones that kind of stood out early on in your life that kind of drove you or kind of just is a reminder to you every day?
I
Um,
I would say it a little bit differently. I think there was so much struggle. I was trying to find little moments of reprieve
yeah.
along the way. But, resistance training, is how we grow. At the time, I wish I could tell you I had the clairvoyance to understand that during the time, and I absolutely didn't. But there is no question that resistance that we have, because, airplanes take off against the wind,
mhm,
not with them, right?
right.
And nature is a great indicator of just how things go. We know night because we know daytime. The
Mm,
waves, they ebb and they flow. There's seasons to life, and I think when we can recognize these patterns, it makes the time at least more efficient. So I had a very bad speech impediment growing up. I was a very awkward kid. Certainly nobody from nowhere. I don't have any special talents per
mhm,
se, but I will tell you, I wasn't born with an off switch. I wish there was a way sometimes to maybe slow it down, but it's this continuous motion of constant, never ending improvement.
mhm.
And no matter what's happening, where I don't know if you saw as a kid, there was those little blow up things that have sand at the bottom and
Yeah,
you
yeah,
punch it and it falls
yeah.
down and just pops back up.
Yep.
Like that's kind of how I think of myself. I just get punched and just kind of pop back up. And the harder you punch me, the quicker that I try to
Yeah.
jump up. But there was definitely some soul crushing stuff along the way, whether it was, my parents divorced at a young age, having to travel on planes back and forth, to see my dad and my dad raising me as a single father. And I could give you, my mommy and daddy sob story, but
Yeah.
but at this point in my life, I'm so grateful truly for all of it, and having a really bad speech impediment um, forced me to do 7 years of speech therapy. And in this
Mhm,
world of technology, in this world where, robots are going to be able to do, most of some of these tasks, I think the human connection and the way to communicate with people, because 80% of communication is nonverbal.
yep.
So learning how to articulate things and being an English literature major, being a lover of books and culture and history has really helped me connect with people in a way that's really meaningful for me, of friends of all different religions, all different cultures,
Mhm,
all different races. And And that has been really incredible because although we've built some incredible buildings, industrial facilities, and we're building the tallest building ever built,
Mhm.
in the Dallas Uptown area, what I'm most proud of is the relationships that I've built, not only with other people, but the relationship that I've built with myself. Because at this point in my life, I know all my demons by their first names.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think you guys are right across from Goldman Sachs,
We are.
if I got that correct. And so we just interviewed Grant Cardone. I think it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago now. A lot of the similar, different upbringings, but also the struggles that he faced. I don't know if you know him,
Yeah, I
being an
do.
Austin guy.
He's a nice guy.
But yeah, he told me like pain is progress, right? Like he had a lot of things. He had addiction early on in his life. He was able to break through that. His father died when he was 10, right? And so a lot of those struggles kind of formulate who you are and the ability to bounce back, right? I always say you got to press play in life, right? And you can't just sit there. And one thing, I was listening to another podcast of yours in preparation for this, and I love the fact that you're saying, you were working multiple jobs. You were a pizza delivery guy. And even then, the one thing you would tell yourself, I believe, going back was, hey, even those one moments that you did have on your couch, you would love to erase those essentially, right? And so what is that like? How do you talk to other people that are out there that are maybe smoking weed and sitting on their couch all day, and how do they don't feel hope? You see AI, like you mentioned,
Sure.
taking a lot of these jobs. And what do you tell that little kid out there that doesn't see a lot of hope graduating college maybe today and seeing all this scary AI news that they're going to take their jobs? What would you articulate to someone like that?
Yeah, we all have the dark night of the soul, and
Mhm.
that's part of the human condition. And measuring somebody's pain is just cruelty
Mhm.
in my opinion. So how we measure our own pain matters. And I think there's something to be said about progress. I heard Ray Dalio explain that pain plus reflection
Mhm.
equals progress. And so part of the process that I've learned in my life is the introspection of pain, because the meaning that we give things is very, very important. You can say,
Mhm.
parents divorced and I'm never getting married. Same person, you could say parents divorced, I'm going to have the best marriage ever
Yep.
because I learned. And you're allowed to change your meaning in certain things. I've always profoundly grateful that I've had a sense of purpose my entire life. It comes from a
Mhm.
sense of faith. It comes from a sense of wanting to contribute and a sense of wanting to grow. And at the beginning, one of the greatest gifts my dad gave me was a goal.
Mhm.
Because a dream, we all have these dreams, they're in our heads. And you mentioned something to me, about health as we were starting. And, somebody that has health, and we're very fortunate not only to live in this country, but have all of our limbs, have our
Mhm.
faculties, have our mind, and a lot of people don't.
Mhm.
And so do you say that those of us that have been this blessed to have this um, avatar, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, have a million dreams.
Yep.
Someone who's unhealthy has one dream.
Exactly.
And so I found that early on, health is something that we can control
Mhm.
in those really dark times. So I saw Bill Ackman talking the other day about a very difficult time in his life. He was going through a divorce. The fund was down 30, 40%. And the anchor asked him, like, so, how did you do it? And
Mhm.
Bill is, I don't know him personally, he was a very charming guy. I've, followed his career. One of my old bosses, on Wall Street, he was one of his early investors in the hotel
Writes
brand.
long transcripts too on
Sure, no, he's
Twitter.
a
I'm a fan though. I like him.
yeah, he's a like I said, I don't know him personally, but I love this interview. And he said, "Well, what did you do during those dark times?" He's like, "Well, I did what I can control." And then
Mhm.
my point is, no matter how tough the times have gotten, and there's been a bunch of them, right
Mhm.
now, people talk about Bitcoin volatility as being a problem. Um, I don't know if they've seen commercial real estate cap rates recently, but those have been pretty volatile too.
Right.
Um, you know, so I think that taking control of something
Mhm.
is how you start to assess progress. And sometimes that means what you put in your mouth.
Yeah.
So no matter the world can be trembling around you, but if you have those gifts that we talked about in front of you, if I can start to gain control of one thing, one small incremental thing, when I wake up in the morning, when I put something in my mouth, because these things are uncontrollable, you start to gain this discipline muscle. Because
Mm.
discipline and focus and where you control your focus and your attention
Mhm.
is a skill. And I don't think they tell you that, in this instruction manual that we don't get as human beings
Mhm.
starting off, but learning to control what you focus your time on, what you're looking at, because whatever you look at is going to grow. Whatever gets your attention, wherever focus goes, energy flows. And that's not like a kitschy tagline anymore. We have science around this. Dr. Joe Dispenza has done these incredible studies around what happens when your brain is coherent, when your heart is coherent. Tony Robbins, the same thing.
Mhm.
I'm a huge believer in this personal development, and that all comes from controlling the things you can control in an uncontrollable world. And oftentimes, believe it or not, the simplest way, not easy to do that, is starting with your health.
Mhm. I love that you brought that up. And funny enough, Steve Jobs, his famous words were, when he was looking back, he all you wanted was health, right? And I just listened to an interview with Kevin O'Leary, who was talking about how Steve Jobs taught him the difference between noise and signal, right? And I think that's, a cheesy thing that people could say, or you could really look into that and say, okay, this is the people that are very successful all follow the same playbook, right? They typically run, they read a lot, right? But he was talking about how to separate like the 3 to 5 things per day. So I don't know if you adhere to that as well of like being able to block out what is noise out there and what is the 3 most important things you do each day. But I guess walk me through. You kind of started it where you said I wake up and the first thing I put in my mouth is a thought that gives me control. But what does that day look like? Do you plan the night before, in the morning? How do you set your day and week ahead?
So I think first, I'm not a robot,
Mhm.
you know, and and I think that's very important to give ourselves a little bit of grace because perfection is a lie.
Mhm.
Okay. Progress is the focus. I'm sure you've heard this word, as you said, come
Yeah.
up a lot. And what I like to focus on is I have at a certain set time a set of goals in various categories. You can look at what they call the wheel of life. And I've worked with many coaches throughout the years, and the best players in the world all have coaches. There
Mhm.
wasn't a time that Phil Jackson could have guarded Michael Jordan,
Right.
yet him and Kobe called him the Zen master. And I think that's very important because you can't see the picture when you're in the frame.
Mm.
So having an outside perspective of looking in on what you're doing is very important. I think this is why the best athletes in the world, watch so much film.
Mhm.
So allowing myself to be flexible is a huge part of what it is. So there's certain times when I'm wildly focused and the goal is career based,
Mhm.
okay, in some regard. But being a father of 3 children, there's a time when I got to take the monster and put him in his cage,
Yeah.
and play, dress up with my 6-year-old, which I do.
Yeah.
And that person in the set of moments, it matters what the goal is for that day, for
Mhm.
that moment, for that increment, and what person needs to show up to be able to do that. But fundamentals win championships, right? So there's certain
Mhm.
fundamentals every day that I think are very important of nurturing you as a holistic being around mind, body, and spirit. So
Mhm.
doing something that I find to be nourishing, whether it's prayer, some sort of devotional that I do through a meditation practice, through transcendental meditation,
Mhm.
or through work with Dr. Joe Dispenza, stuff I've learned from Tony Robbins that I would, shout out to Tony Robbins, who's the greatest to ever do it in so many
Yeah.
different ways. But he has an exercise that I'd like to say I do it every day, but 80/20-ish.
Yeah. You're human.
And I'm getting better at realizing that I'm a human also, because chastising yourself every day for not being perfect is just not productive.
Right.
And I've done that for most of my life, and maybe it did accelerate some of my accolades on paper, but it sure didn't create a fulfilling, meaningful life. And at this point in my life, I'm more concerned with a full, meaningful life than I am with checking off a bunch of boxes on a resume, for the record. But he calls it emotional priming. And the same way that we exercise our physique, our muscles, our emotional health has that same level of fitness, for lack of a better word.
Mm.
So you start off and you do this breathing where you put your arms over your head, you breathe out through your nose, and we have tons of science around what happens when you breathe through these
Mhm.
patterns. Heart becomes coherent, brain becomes coherent. And when your brain and heart are coherent, you automatically make better decisions.
Mhm.
It's just science, where science has now become the language of mysticism, which is a
Mhm.
very beautiful thing that we can quantify it. So doing this breathing, then having a gratitude practice where very simply, and I know some of this stuff sounds super corny, but it works.
Mhm.
And as I said, like I had to build this guy from the ground up. Whatever humble success I've had in my life has come from the things I've learned in books, trying out all these different things. I've done 6 different 7-day meditation seminars this year. I just did another Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within digitally or virtually a few weeks ago. So I'm constantly trying to keep this playful, curious mind in everything that I do and to stay in awe, for lack of a better word. You know, people say, oh, this is really humble or really whatever. It's like, not really. It's that I actually sit back in awe thinking, I didn't do all this shit. Yeah, I did work hard, but I have people all around me that work hard. Our firefighter investors, our construction workers, people work hard and they don't always get a lucky break. I know I got a lucky break. I can tell you 70 things that should not have gone my way logically, and through some serendipitous fairy dust, you know, the Red Sea was parted and things happened. And when I know that to be a fact, it's very hard to take all the credit for, you know, life happening for me throughout this time. So I keep a practice. That's why you people say it's a meditation practice. It's not a meditation game or result. And so this practice I do with emotional fitness, which was a huge revelation, was I can train my focus to stay more focused on elevated emotions. Will you fall back into these places of getting jarred or getting angry or getting whatever? That's human also. But what you can start to control is what's called the refractory period, meaning that you get angry, something happens, and I spent a lot of my life very angry, very resentful, very entitled, and then spend weeks feeling bad for myself. Well, now over time through this practice, it takes minutes, not days or not weeks. And that's something that happens, same as an athlete. They learn to sprint every day, you get better at sprinting. The things that you do, you get better on. And so I have much more of a focus on my emotional fitness because all the businesses in the world right now are paying for your attention. That's basically what they do, you know, and there's an algorithm, you know, that's way above my pay grade that what Meta or any of these shops do, Google, to get you to pay attention to their short, to their TikTok, to their this, and they're vying for your attention. So I'm training my attention to stay on the things that I want to do, to your point, reviewing my goals right when I wake up in the morning, doing the emotional exercises of breathing, focusing on my gratitude, like taking 3 things I'm profoundly grateful for, doing a meditation twice a day, you know, for anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, maybe 50 minutes per session, depending on the time I have. And again, not in a regimented, militant way. Like I go through phases where from an eating standpoint, I am nutritionally militant. I mean, I do meal prepping, chicken breasts, veggies, sweet potatoes, no gluten, no dairy, no sugar for weeks. But then with my kids, you know, you eat pizza or this or that. And
they got leftovers.
or whatever it looks like. So I have found a rhythm that keeps me more in the majority of what I believe to be a meaningful, healthier kind of lifestyle. But that took training to think of the things that I wanted to achieve and truly evoke those feelings of happiness, of joy, of elation, to the point where I literally jump up and down sometimes in the morning or in the afternoon, or I get some email with another, you know, in the real estate business, you know, something's always happening. Property management, a tenant's doing this, someone's upset about something, a lender, an investor, you know, it's a big business, or, you know, and the best businesses in the world solve big problems, right? So the bigger the issues, in the word, I always joke that billions starts with bills, you know, so there's problems that are inherently locked in. So finding a way to be delighted before I have the thing directly in front of me to be delighted about trains the nervous system to expect delightful things to actually happen to you in your life.
This episode of Bitcoin Economy is brought to you by Crypto.com.
Crypto.com has millions of users, has been around since 2016, and they just released proof of reserves on their verification page, driving the industry standard for transparency within centralized exchanges.
Link in the show notes below. Download the Crypto.com app and get started today.
I was thinking in the words of Biggie Smalls, more money, more problems. And then I really like what you were saying with control, what you can control. I had this problem during COVID. I was just doom scrolling constantly. And then I had this epiphany one day. I was like, what am I doing? I can't control this. This is just making me angry at the world. Same thing with politics. My dad just sent me something the other day, and I was like, yeah, it's the same thing. I've kind of had my mind made up at this point. Like, I can control what I can control. So it's very interesting. We're living in this world with AI, with constant distractions, right? And I feel bad for the next generation. We do our best to not get our kid in front of the TV. We try to play with her, make sure that she's focused on reality, right? Because there's so many things that are, it's hard to discern reality from what is fiction nowadays. And especially with AI, with these different videos that come out, there could be a video of us that has a full different conversation, right? And so being able to authenticate it, trying to find a way here to loop this back into Bitcoin of what is ultimately real, because our Bitcoin listeners are probably like, what's going on right now? But I think Bitcoiners are humans. And at the end of the day, they all have similar problems, similar differences. Real estate and Bitcoin, to me, have a lot of similarities. I'd say they're both finite amount of land. I remember talking to my brother probably 15 years ago, and I didn't have any money to do this, but I was like, we need to buy land, in the Midwest, in Idaho and Montana before it gets really big, because eventually these cities, God forbid, one terrorist attack away, if global warming potentially happens and the coastal cities go away, I don't know if that's going to happen necessarily, but even just people want more freedom and to be away from a lot of the noise. And so you chose Austin, Texas as your home. And I was reading like the Sun Belt is your area. What was attractive to that? And was real estate, was there this concept of being finite asset that was attractive to you? Similar to Bitcoin, there's 21 million ever. You take Satoshis away, there's really only 20 million. You take the lost Bitcoin away, there's really only like 19 million or so, right? And they're never printing more. Even gold, I remember Michael Saylor mentioned, if you have 100% of the gold today, in 50 years from now, you have 50% because they're finding 2% basically every single year. So real estate and Bitcoin have this connection. First question, I guess, was why the Austin, why the Sun Belt was interesting to you, and then in general, how do you view finite assets versus what we see today with the money printer goes burr, as a lot of the kids say online. But that's the reality, right? The Fed just keeps printing money, and you can't print more land, you can't print more Bitcoin.
Well, I think it comes down to first and foremost identity. I
Mhm.
think when you know your identity, a lot of things start to show themselves. I was born in Austin, Texas. It was
Mhm.
home. When you talk about, you know, land as a general rule is scarce. It's
Mhm.
not technically finite because we have air rights. They're
Mhm.
in Dubai, they're making islands,
Yep.
So Bitcoin, in theory, is totally finite. One
Mhm.
is scarce, one is
Good
finite.
point.
And there's a balance between those things. And I'll tell you, the future of the globalization of any type of digital currency, again, goes back to identity. Because
Mhm.
until we unlock true, secure digital identity, none of this works.
Mhm.
So someone's Finsta's account, sitting, trading some kind of, currency. So I think that future of figuring out how we secure our digital identities to unlock this system, because all tokenization, all of these things are the digital infrastructure. Bitcoin is the first chapter in a
Mhm.
very, very long story around the plumbing. To me, what's most interesting as an attorney is the compliance mechanism, is how KYC is done globally. And the settlement, the way investments settle, as an example, is from a 1970s era, when we were still using telephones. So the innovation around this is so much greater
Mhm.
than what, Bitcoin has done. And clearly, Larry Fink and BlackRock have found a way to package this up into an ETF. And people say he kind of blessed Bitcoin. And I think it's beyond that. I think it legitimized it, but
Really.
we can't confuse access with safety.
Mhm.
So by packaging it up into an ETF, it unlocked this $1 trillion opportunity. And Larry can sneeze and $3 trillion literally change hands. But now the money managers have the ability to place it in 401ks and IRAs. And I'm kind of, get a little bit of a laugh when people, say that, oh, Bitcoin and this stuff is a scam. I'm like, well,
Mm.
you say that at the same time you're using a credit card with 26%
Right.
interest. I'm like, bud,
Yeah.
Visa is the real blockchain assassin. Or, someone at work is spending 4.5 hours researching a $9 altcoin that they don't even know what it does and won't spend 30 minutes on their own
I
job.
just had the conversation in an Uber,
So,
today.
so I think it comes back to what your values are, what your identity was. Austin happened to be home. We happened to get pretty lucky. I think
Mhm.
real estate is about people more than anything. And Austin is a cool town. It's a town on steroids. It's definitely not a city. It's got lakes. It's called the music capital of
Yeah.
the world. There's now great comedy shows. There's breakfast tacos and barbecue, and
Mhm.
it's freaking beautiful. So
Yeah.
people look at Texas, like, okay, business friendly and this, that, and the other. But I don't really want to live in Midland. Like I have some
Yeah.
dear friends in Midlands, great area, Permian Basin, largest oil reserve on planet Earth, FYI. But Austin is this little oasis in the middle of all the big business of Houston and Dallas that people from the outside looking in. And so there wasn't as much of the sage wisdom other than UT is a cool school. It's
Yeah.
great sports. People like
It
good
was like a
sports.
hippie town,
Yeah, it was
for
it
a
was
while.
a literally it was a funky little hippie town, quite literally that, started to have people want to be there. The university has youth, has vibrance, and that's the high level. Like, so you
Mhm.
start obviously, do I want to be in the US? Sure. Then do I want to be in a place that's business friendly with no state income tax? Sure. So
Mhm.
out of all these choices, where can I have the most fun?
Yeah.
Because people want to be places that are fun. Look at the best performing economies in the world.
Yep.
There is always an element of fun. There's
Mhm.
an element of youth, element of vibrancy, and a reason that people want to be there. And that's why, Tesla's headquarters is now in Austin.
Yep.
Oracle's headquarters now in
Coinbase
Austin.
just came down to Dallas.
A little company called Dell, you might have heard of,
Yep.
headquarters in Austin as well.
Whole
Samsung,
Foods.
yeah, Whole Foods was founded there, absolutely. So these were the initial thought processes. We've invested in 38 cities, 13 states, 7 different asset classes. So we've run the gambit and looked at some cool stuff and in some cool areas. But I was born in Austin. I went to middle school and high school in Dallas. I went to law school in San Antonio.
Mhm.
That all runs on one highway called I-35. It's
Mhm.
literally a straight line. It goes from Mexico up to Dallas. And so I've lived my life on this I-35 corridor. So it's home, and you know the people,
Yep.
and so it makes it easier to find deal flow. And it sounds very commonsensical. This is not some algorithm that was
Yeah.
articulated for the oracle of, whatever Forbes said. But it was something about a culture and a people that we really understood. And, there is $10 billion chasing, $100 million in deals. And
Mhm.
that's the real scarcity is, money now is infinite, but deals are not.
Yeah. And in Austin in particular, I think I was just reading something that so many people at influx, right? So they built up a bunch, right? I think there's like 20% extra capacity where some of the rents are going down a little bit now. Same with Bitcoin. It's down 20+% at least from the high. And we're talking today, I think it was 97,000 to timestamp this interview of where it's at. 10 years from now, we'll see it at 1 million and get going. But what was it about Bitcoin? You said 7, I believe 7 different asset classes that you guys
Sure.
work with. So I'd love to hear just in general what that looks like. And then what was your Bitcoin like origin story? How'd you find it? What was intriguing about it for you? And what do you kind of see the future with Bitcoin?
Sure. My chief of staff, Major Miller, who's also my best friend since 7th grade, he's been understanding Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for years. He's the one that actually taught me
Okay.
about it initially. I
Orange
can be
pilled.
I can be kind of myopic in the things that I'm just kind of doing and drown out the noise for lack of a better word, but he's the one that kind of put me on it, invested in it early and gives me my footnotes on all these things. But what was most interesting is watching just this digital revolution in general. And at first, I think like a lot of people, I didn't understand it. And I think there's a lot of things about it that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around. But what I do understand is my son. My son Kingston is a brilliant Fortnite player. I mean, truly. I know people say that about their kids, but he'll be a professional gamer. Absolutely. He's comfortable buying tokens and skins.
Mhm.
And so these words and these terms were very comfortable for me in talking with him and
Mhm.
realizing that they're living in this digital world. So I started to think, do I fight that wave of rock and roll and rap music kind of thing, like my
Right.
parents would have
Yeah. Yeah.
said, or do I start to maybe try to understand it a little bit better? And I tried to, explain, the Federal Reserve to my daughter, and she looks at me like, so we run out of money and we just
Print
print
more.
more?
Yeah.
Okay, but she sure can understand Bitcoin, and they
Mhm.
certainly understand it. So that conundrum of seeing that generational gap is when I started to get, really, really interested. And anytime Larry Fink talks, I start to get a little bit more
Yeah.
interested, quite frankly, when I start hearing that tokenization is going to truly change everything in this world, I started to think. And I got to spend some time with Michael Saylor personally a few months ago down in Palm Beach. He was speaking at an event, and just such a charismatic guy, you know. And I was kind of a fly on the wall of him at a table talking to a few multi-billionaires, legitimate billionaires. Um, and the way that he explained it from a real estate analogy, and I know he said it
Uses
many times.
Manhattan all the
Yeah,
time.
and we're sitting in Manhattan right now, and you know, he's like, no, it's like wanting to buy this property in a very desirable area with limited supply and demand. I was like, oh, my little brain can understand that. Like
Right.
that part I get. And then started to, you know, go down the rabbit hole a little bit more and learn about Adam Back or
Yep.
Satoshi. And I've been asked that question a bunch, and I think it's much more likely that there's a team of people that being singular into a person. And clearly, if you look at the cryptography and you look at Hashcash,
Mm.
you look at all these mechanisms that point to Mr. Back, I think there's a lot more, maybe like a cypherpunk community that, you know, created this, you know, this mechanism. But as an attorney, you look at what could go wrong.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, you have to look at what could go right.
Mhm.
Okay. So balancing those concepts, there's still so much to be unpacked. And I think when people start saying that Bitcoin competes with the US Treasury, my eyes gloss over, because the
Yeah.
United States Treasury is backed by a government. It has federal cash flows and has a fucking military
That's the point.
as a
Yep.
military. So until you have a fucking military that protects what you're doing, I get that has this value. I get all that,
Mhm.
but let's not compare it to the United States Treasury
Yeah.
yet. Like you said, many other things could happen. And also the stability of people saying, oh, this is a hedge against governmental risk. I don't think those people understand government entirely, because when real economic crisis happens, and we have a lot of history on this, okay?
Mhm.
Bitcoin has not yet endured a real financial crisis, because when financial crises happen, you flee to things that are actually safe, meaning treasuries, gold, silver. And the reason why is they don't fluctuate in value by 20% in a week.
Mm.
And so regardless of whether or not they're completely finite, whether they're completely scarce, there's still wood to chop on what could happen. I saw someone talking the other day that maybe one of these new super intelligent cybercomputers can crack the code on the whole thing and it's over.
Mm.
And so I think that cautious optimism, and the way that is an example, and I'm not a financial advisor, by the way, I'm just a dumb real estate developer. What do I know?
Mm.
But if you look at the asset allocation models, that's where genius comes into investing. So this is America, and you can buy whatever you want. You want to speculate? Great. You're allowed to do that. And I love that. So when you look at your portfolio as a whole, if you're sitting in your 401k, you're looking to retire, having a segment, a percentage, and I think BlackRock now is recommending 3% of it into one of the cryptos or into Bitcoin. I think there's a risk-adjusted return factor that makes that viable, makes that has some inherent smarts to what it is. But looking at the end-all be-all at a time when we're still very much in the nascent levels, because I think the last thing I saw is all Bitcoin would be mined by the year 2144, or
I think it's roughly
something like that, give or take acceleration, J curves, et cetera. So we still have some time to see how it's going to mature. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because AI, as an example, is not its own thing. Artificial intelligence is like electricity. It's the undercurrent enablement tool for other things. You don't look in here and just think of the light and this and the camera. You don't think about electricity about being its own thing, because it's powering this. So what Bitcoin has done is created this digital currency. Great. But underneath it is the digital infrastructure, is changing the plumbing that has desperately been needed to change, because taking 72 hours to clear my credit card payment is asinine.
Right.
I mean, it's just
Saturdays you can't get your money.
Yeah, or like, and so once we find a secure digital identity, once we understand global KYC laws, we're on the precipice of something incredible. I just don't want to put the cart before the horse. And I want to find a way where, you know, the amount of FOMO, to use something my daughter would say, around the volatility, or people investing in some altcoin that is up 40% that they missed out on, they end up making 40% return. They think they're Satoshi's cousin.
Yep.
And so that part of it, that exuberance, I'd like to see tempered because 99% of these cryptocurrencies that are out will be completely non-existent over the course of whatever that time is. And again, this is how things evolve. It's not a knock, it's just a clarification of people putting their hard-earned money, their retirements into something that's that speculative, because we can't put speculation and safety in the same sentence. And just because BlackRock makes an ETF that makes it accessible, that doesn't mean it's safe.
Totally.
And so I think tempering those things, finding great asset allocation buckets, working with sophisticated financial advisors, which I am not, I just don't want a generation to wake up within 10, 20 years of something that's going to be incredibly brilliant, that changes the entire world, that's the ability to bring peace and stability and all the things that Bitcoin and these currencies can do before they mature.
And Bitcoin has been around, 15 plus years now. In the swings, there's many things I just agreed with you on. I think some of the pushback may be that it's now coming back, in terms of, there was a 90% drawdown. Now 4 years later is a 70% drawdown, 50% drawdown. So it's starting to follow, the M2 money supply, right? There are certain things now with the ETFs coming in, with more institutions coming in, like the quote smart money that they call it, right?
The adults are here now.
Yeah. So yeah, the suits in the room, and you see it. I used to go to conferences. People would be wearing costumes, and it was hard to take those people seriously, right?
Yeah.
But
That's the evolution, right? Like
Yeah.
that's part of growing up, I think, is, what the kids are wearing to you grow up to wear your suit. And I think that's the evolutionary process where I agree with you that the directionality and the indicators of this becoming a mature adult that's a whatever is certainly there. I think the confusion, or my dissenting opinion, and again, who am I?
Yeah.
I'm a nobody from nowhere, as I told you, is that sometimes mistaking a youth for being a seasoned adult can be dangerous.
As a parent, I could not agree more. Talking to a 2-year-old, I have to
I'm
remind
not gonna let my
myself.
6-year-old drive the car yet.
Yeah.
Like it's just not. I have no doubt that by 16 and driver's ed, she will
Yeah.
be able to drive the car and put her seatbelt on, and all that will be great. But between now and then, I'm putting her in her car seat.
Exactly. So no, I think you brought up some good points and valid point about the military. I always say that, it's like if the US government or any government, we saw it with China, even like they try to cut it down a little bit, Bitcoin, is going to have to face that day, right? And I think the beauty of Bitcoin versus something like a gold, that's why I asked that question of what is money? The first question is because what is it ultimately? It's the belief system within people that I give you something, you can give me something back. And if you break it down to
Sure.
the simplest way, the proliferation, I'd say, of Bitcoin is now global, right? And so if the US government cut it off, it would be damning to Bitcoin for sure, but it could still survive, right? And even if, God forbid, there's an EMP attack, they have nodes now in on the moon, basically, or in orbiting right now, which is pretty crazy in the satellite. I learned that the other day. So there are a lot of things that could go wrong still with Bitcoin, but you're starting to see it move more even with gold, where it is that finite asset, where there's certain people you see
And gold's not finite, by the way. We're going to be
Right,
mining
it's
gold
2%
to the
every
year
year, basically.
2500. I saw some algorithm. We're going to keep mining gold. So I think that's definitely in favor of, if we know a finite day definitively when 21 million plus or minus the shortages or the losses are going to get there, we're going to be mining gold
Yep.
for hundreds of years at the very least, from what we know. Forget about the new imaging softwares and things that are rewriting the history of Rome that are that we can find them. So again, those fundamentals and those concepts are certainly very, very, very encouraging. But the timelines are the part that if someone's retiring at 65 years old, that's my only pushback is, not that, is it going to go to a million, 10 million base? After I talked to Michael, I think this thing's going to 20 million bucks a coin. I mean, listening to him explain it
he's amazing.
and he's a stud. Like, he's explaining the thing, you're getting it. But my only thing is when, what does that look like? I look at an index fund, although boring, but boring is beautiful, at a 7% annualized compounded rate of return with great risk adjusted returns, having a certain amount in US equities, certain amount in whatever. There's a level of certainty. Clearly, a billion things could go wrong, but there's a level of thousands of years of history and certainty that couple that's looking to retire in the next 10 years, 20 years, 5 years might not need to expose themselves to something that could take 100 years, 50 years to mature into this incredible, life-changing, global, world-changing currency, for lack of a better word, is really my only real criticism is, you know, am I gonna bet, granny's
Yeah.
retirement on it yet? And for me, if someone were to ask me, and advice is like hallucinations, right? It comes through your own prejudice.
Yeah.
I would say no.
Mm. I would say the 7% comes down to about 2% if you factor in like the inflation, right? I think that's something that Saylor was always talks about. But I do agree with you, and that's what's kind of cool. He's made these preferred, right? And then he takes these, if you're in the money market account making 6%, you can now make 12% with Stretch.
Oh, didn't
It's
they have a
Stride.
100% dividend in strategy? Have like
Yeah,
a
so they're
100%
they're
dividend?
they're given quite a bit, and it's perpetual, right? And it's monthly, so it almost feels too good to be true. You've seen the price of MSTR though, plummet over the past couple months. I don't know if that's money shifting into these more preferred, but you bring up a good point. Someone that's young, they can take these risks, they can take these chances. Where if you're 70 years old, your amount of timeline to make new money, that time length is shortened, right? And so that is where you want to put
Back to identity.
yeah,
It
exactly.
comes back to identity and to what your value is and what your risk tolerance is, right? Like,
Mhm.
there's some folks that, if they can clip their coupons, and that comes from
Yep.
actually clipping a coupon, to get to that identity standard of living. And I'm very interested in our core business, whether it's the houses we're starting to 3D print, the robotics work
Mm.
we're doing, the industrial facilities around Tesla and the Gigafactory, and then our houses and apartments. I'm always thinking, how can we increase the standard of living and the standard of work for
Yeah.
people?
Yep.
That's the thing that I'm constantly
The
thinking
community
about, the
too.
community, because, real estate, is local.
Yep.
Currency is national,
Mhm.
but this new age of digital currency could be global, and that's fucking interesting.
That is interesting. Also, you see things like China. You talked about identity. So you travel all the time. You mentioned before we started talking, you're going to be leading, I think it's a talk, or you'll be heading out to Dubai. So I would love to hear a little bit about that. But there's a book. It's called and I'm going to butcher this, but it's like shake hands, kiss, hug. It's talking about throughout the world. There's different cultures. I remember an ex-girlfriend's father of mine said he was doing a multi-billion-dollar deal in Japan. All the Japanese went to the bathroom. They came back. I just had read Shoe Dog right before, so it reminded me so much of Shoe
Amazing.
Dog. And they came back and they literally did billion-dollar deal on napkins, right? But he didn't know. They all went to the bathroom. They came back and they said, "Let's move forward." So going out and all the travels you've done, what have you learned? And then heading into Dubai, what's that conference about?
Well, it's the Abu Dhabi Finance Week, so
Okay.
there's a lot going on, and it's actually my first time to the Middle East. And back to the points of my origin,
Yeah.
as an Iranian American, being in Dubai, the Strait of Hormuz
Yeah.
is between
Everything.
Iran, and so I'm able to see. It actually is the most oil in the world goes to that one little,
Mhm.
one little strip. So I'm personally looking forward to kind of seeing my motherland, albeit from a
Yeah.
distance, and send some prayers to the people and to the area, and hope that more freedoms come, for lack of a better term. So that's very exciting by itself. And I think there's something about people, that there's like a universal language that I've found. And I've traveled a little bit, but not nearly. I haven't spent much time in Asia, which I'm very much
Mhm.
looking forward to. I've studied the culture and the religions, and from the meditation practices that we've done. And so I'm just enamored by the cultures. But I will say that I think that empathy is
Mhm.
really the universal emotion. And no
Mhm.
matter if you don't speak the language, because as I said before, and Paul Ekman has been one of the leading teachers, and I took his courses for many years on body language and empathy, and how we look at people and listen to them, even if we don't understand the language coming out of their mouth. There's some universal human behaviors of how we see people, how we smile, how we
Yeah.
nod,
I was gonna say
um,
laughter is universal.
laughter, how we blush. Mark Twain, used to say that man is the only animal that blushes or needs to. And so there's ways that I think I'm interested in watching those things. And I think right now we can't have enough empathy. I think
Mhm.
with all the geopolitical things happening that are above my pay grade, but that part is gonna be really, really cool. We're starting a massive fundraise,
Mhm.
for a bunch of stuff that we're doing in Texas around data centers and hopefully AI chip manufacturing and
Mm.
power plant development, and so there's a lot of really exciting things that are happening there in Texas, and be able to talk with the world's investors and see what they see looking in, see what their objectives are. I'm looking forward to talking, but I'm also looking forward to listening.
Yeah, yeah. I just spoke with Hut 8. I was interviewing Asher Ganote, who's the CEO of Hut 8, and Eric Trump. I had the opportunity to interview, and it was wild, right? I'm very humbled to sit behind a podcast microphone and get this opportunity to speak with some of these like very accomplished individuals. And Asher's, I just found out, is turning 31, right? So it's like wild to me. I'm 38 now, so it's like, oh shit, now I got to play catch up. But there's so much to learn. You mentioned you learn from your kids. You mentioned learning from different cultures. I think being able to have that empathy for individuals. At the end of the day, a lot of racism, things like that, it's just by not talking to them and not understanding people, right? And so I think that is so huge. And you bringing back like real estate, your core business, it comes down to people. And that at the end of the day, I think you maybe said this, but like everyone's in sales ultimately, right? And it doesn't need to be, you could be the front desk person. How you greet that individual when they walk in could have a huge effect on them, right? So all these things comes down to people ultimately. If you could leave your kids, and I was just thinking about this, what I would say to my kid if I had one day left, on this planet and could leave my kids with something, what would be the message you'd want to leave with your children?
And I think it's at its most basic level is keep going. And when things are really good, don't get too excited, and things are really bad, don't get too excited. But I think one of the most fundamental rules or thoughts, and I've keep it keeps changing,
Yeah,
albeit I keep finding when
fair.
I think I know something for sure, and back to Mark Twain, who I wrote my dissertation about, actually met him in Shakespeare, but basically he probably has my favorite quote of all time, and I've repeated it many times, but I think right now is important in this dialogue. He said that it's not what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so.
Mm,
And so being able to know that problems are the gifts that we grow from,
mhm.
and looking at them and thinking one of the biggest, I think, misunderstandings we have as human beings on this earth is thinking that we're not supposed to have problems.
Yeah.
If I could re-signify for my children that when you see a problem, look at it as a gift of something that is going to grow you, shape you, mature you for whatever that destination that you're after. I
Mhm.
think if that one thing could be instilled into their mind alone, I think they'd be on the path to living an even more beautiful life.
I love it. Ari, I could talk to you for hours. This was inspiring. I think we hit on health, we hit on wealth, we hit on Bitcoin. Definitely want to, dive into your hyperbaric chambers, that, all the different things that you do for your health. I'm on my journey. I'm starting today with a blood test to see how, different foods affect my ability. But the one thing I gathered from you is you're always learning. You don't feel like you know every single thing, even though someone could look at you, look at, your house, the wealth that you've created. You still don't look at, you're very humble, and it's been very cool, and I had the opportunity to hear someone like you saying, your journey is just beginning. You're just
Oh, I'm
learning
just getting
yourself.
warmed up.
I love it. I
I'm just
love it.
getting warmed up. I promise you that much.
Well, we'll have to have you back on the show. Really appreciate the time,
Thanks,
and
brother.
thanks for coming on the Bitcoin
Appreciate it
Economy.
so much.